Good afternoon, good evening actually. My name is Doojin Hwang, and today I'll be talking about the issues of density in Seoul's urban generation. I think we are all familiar with this diagram. This particular building, it no longer exists. It was destroyed during the war. It was built in 6th century AD. In Silla dynasty. It's one of the old dynasties in Korean Peninsula. It's got 9 floors and it's about 90 meters tall. And history had to wait for 1,400 years to anything that remotely resembles this building in terms of size and scale and number of floors. That was in mid 20th century. So this one was very unique. It was obviously a national monument. But other than that, traditionally, historically, Seoul, as well as the rest of the country, is extremely low density situation. As you see in this picture of a model of Seoul in 18th century, practically every building in the model has just one story. So the FAR, overall density, is very low. It's about 30 or 40%. So from a contemporary urban point of view, this probably was not a city. It's more like an extended village. So when we compare Seoul to the old Seoul, pre-modern Seoul, to other historic cities in the world, such as Sanjiminyano, and even some other Asian cities such as Kuala Lumpur, or Singapore, we can tell that Seoul actually is an extreme case of low density environment. Well, the Koreans have tried to have more number of floors, but this was the maximum they could because we are mostly building in wood. And unless you are building a national monument with a lot of resources for ordinary people, this was the best they could do. So even during 1930s and 40s, when Korea was a Japanese colony, we were building houses like that. These are all courtyard houses, as you can tell. And inside the courtyard houses, life must have been quite good. I mean, there is a very strong relationship between interior and exterior. This particular sketch was done by myself when I was in college. We were on a field research, and they asked us to produce very detailed research drawings of these courtyard houses. A number of courtyard houses, when they are put together, create this alley with the very strong sense of the wall, such as in this picture. This is in Bukchon, one of these Seoul's oldest areas. It's a historical preservation area, so there are a lot of restrictions and regulations. And this kind of situation actually was a source of inspiration for me when I was the designer of another Korean contemporary architects exhibition that took place about 10 years ago. We started from Frankfurt, Germany, then we traveled to Berlin, Tallinn, and Spain. And I was not only a participating architect, but I was also the designer of the exhibition. For this exhibition in Budapest, we have other people doing the design part. But at that time, we had to do everything by ourselves. So again, the reference was this alley situation in Seoul. When this kind of extreme low density situation met with modernization, this is what happened. I took this picture in 1983. Again, I was a student. I bought my first camera. I went up on a hill and took this picture of an area where there are hundreds of traditional houses, mostly built in 1930s and 40s. 20 years after that, I went back to this area again, but I wasn't really ready for this. The same area. All these traditional houses are gone. And if I give a title to this picture, this will be it. The price for losing this war is really lethal. You have to disappear. Meanwhile, it's a little different story here. Took this picture yesterday when we were given this wonderful tour of the city. This is in Budapest, just in case you don't recognize. Even those pre-modern buildings seem to have quite substantial density to me. So when you build new buildings here, you don't normally add more density to it. You work within the framework of the existing density. So this is what happened. But back to Seoul. This is not outskirts of Seoul. This really is in downtown Seoul. And we have situations like this. 1 or 2 story building. So there is a strong, very strong debate going on in Seoul and Korea these days, because some people have very strong mental attachment to these old areas, because they went to bars in this area, they went to shops. But on the other hand, there are voices that says that we can no longer let this kind of low density situation stay longer. So normally density wins. So I think sooner or later this old, the context will disappear, just as the old Hanoks before. So as a matter of fact, if we compare Seoul to Paris, a very typical European city, the numbers tell a lot of stories. People in Seoul believe that we live in a very dense city, not in terms of hardware, but also in terms of population. But we could be wrong, because Paris, with its most 6-story tall buildings, seem to have much higher population density. This normally comes as a shock to many Koreans. And also in terms of number of floors, Seoul, despite its tall buildings, the average number of floors for all the buildings is only 2.5. The first time I saw this number, I couldn't believe myself. This is actually from a book written by a colleague of Professor Min, Kim Sung-hong. And I had to ask him several times whether these numbers are really true. He said yes. So in terms of FIR, across the city, Seoul's only 160, but Paris is probably a little above 250. So it's much more dense city than Seoul is. The reason is, there are still many areas like this in Seoul. Low density areas surrounded by high-rise buildings. So these are like time bombs ticking, ready to go off at any moment. Then sometimes it goes kaboom, like this. So this is actually my project, and it's a 15-story office tower. And look at the strong contrast between the tower and the surrounding area. The contrast in terms of density. This time we are adding a lot of density to the existing area. And again, this is not the outskirts of Seoul. This is Gangnam-daero, which is one of the major boulevards in the area called Gangnam. Gangnam as in Gangnam style. You probably should know about that. So this tower is entirely clad in porous brick wall. So we used 300,000 bricks. And the porosity of the wall allows 50% of the sun from the west, because the building faces due west. So it not only reduces the energy for air conditioning during the summer, but also creates very interesting pattern of light and shadow that moves constantly according to the changes of the sun. and also has a nice roof garden on top. So when the night falls, the light coming from inside the office building will give a very different look to the porous brick wall. So this is a case in which we had to add a lot of density to the existing context. The second project is quite the opposite. We can't add density because that's what the regulation says. This young couple, against all the oppositions from their parents, they bought this very old, dilapidated house, which obviously had not been inhabited for quite a long time. And they asked us to renovate this house to be their home. And that's exactly what we did. But again, as I said, there was nothing that we could do in terms of adding more density to it, because this is a historic preservation project. So this is the end result. And it has all the features of elements in normal houses that allow people to have contemporary lifestyle, such as this. They have good time there. And as a matter of fact, we have been doing quite a large number of projects like that. This is downtown Seoul, historic center of Seoul. This is one of our main palace. And where two red lines cross is where my office is. So within 2-kilometer radius, I think there are about 30 dots. They're all completed projects. And some of them are like, just like the project that you just saw. Sometimes we do something like that in our own community. It's a small symbolic gate to a traditional open market. But instead of using clay tile, I put a glass roof on top of it. And this was my homage to Miss Van der Rohe's glass skyscraper back in 1920s. This belongs to the third category. This is a kind of mid-sized building, not too big. And this is probably the most frequent type of project that any architect living in Seoul normally do. This particular building is a clinic, but not a Western clinic. It's a traditional Korean clinic. And a single family has been running this clinic for about 180 years. And the current doctor is the 7th generation of the Korean traditional medical doctor. So before we designed this building, which is here, and there was a very classical old style medical clinic on the site. So this time we were also adding quite substantial density to the site. It's a very complex building. We call this a clinic, but it's more than a clinic because the family has been running this business for such a long time, so they needed a small museum of traditional herbal medicine, and also an auditorium so that they can have seminars and things like that. So this is the floor plan. So this is one of the very first proposals we made to the doctor. Our idea was, these are the herbal medicine production machines. I mean, people have all these romantic ideas about traditional medical practice. You know, classical old man boiling some liquid on fire, but that's no longer the case. Everything is automatic and mechanized. So our idea was put 4 of these machines in a row and put them in a glass box and put them in the front of the building so the people on the street can see them. There is nothing to hide. So it's like bashing the myth of tradition in a visual way. And of course, the doctor didn't say a word for like 3 days. Then he called us and said, Mr. Hwang, we had some hard time deciding whether we had to go with this or not, but he finally decided that he was going to support the idea. So we built this. And as I said, you can look at this from the street. And this is a small museum and the auditorium in the basement. The story doesn't end here. A few years after we completed this building, we got another call from the doctor. He said, "Mr. Hwang, we can't put an addition to the building." I said, "What?" He said, "The building code has changed for more density." So we turned what used to be a balcony around the museum into a double-story exhibition space. So this is the current situation of the building. This used to be the balcony here, but now it's an exhibition space. So this clearly shows the changes in regulations in Seoul that's geared toward more density each time changes are made. So this is quite a rare case in which one building goes through the process twice. The last project is called North Terrace. It's again in terms of program, it's very complex. It even has a residence on top here. And the site is really good. I mean, it actually faces the Changdeok Palace, which Mr. Wu kind of also talked about in his presentation. It's one of the UNESCO World Heritage Site. And in this case, we were not adding any density to the existing situation because unlike our traditional houses, the building that were there had enough density already. So the owner and I decided that we will preserve the density but change everything else. And I don't know who designed the building, but the original architect of this building must have thought that in the future another building like this will stand here. And so he was very careless in terms of locating all these external units for air conditioning. So the facade is very ugly. But then something very strange happened. Seoul Metropolitan Government bought this piece of property and they built one-story traditional building, which is a traditional music hall. So what that means is that the view toward the palace is now permanently guaranteed. So what we did was actually quite radical in terms of relocating buildings' vertical transportation. Originally, the stairs and elevator was in the northern corner of the building where the view was the best. So we had to relocate them here. And the picture showed the extensive the changes that we made to the building. This is what remains of the existing staircase. So the building also turned into some kind of small cultural complex. We have a basement. The existing building also had the basement, which was a big advantage in terms of providing enough density. And the ground floor is a cafe. And the second floor and third floor is actually rented out to private book clubs. Book clubs are big fad in Korea these days. And there is a private office here and a small residence on top for the owner's family. The regulations in this area is very strict. We have to design a building only with pitched roof, like that. So we said, screw it, because I had a very particular idea about how to create the interior of the top floor, especially when it comes to ceiling design. So instead we inverted it, created this slope here, but for some reason it passed the design review. So this is the ground floor, which is a cafe, and we tried to create this lower part of the building as porous as possible so that building can interact very fully with the street in front of it, with open stair and balconies and stuff. This is the interior of the cafe. We purposefully left this rough surface and also exposed the steel reinforcement of the beam, just to show that this building was renovated, not built new. And this is where they have these book clubs, and they asked me to lead one of the book clubs. That's me, standing in the middle. On this particular day, we read and discussed the classic, The Death and Life of Great American Cities by Jane Jacobs, which everyone quotes, but nobody actually reads. The owner, the couple was actually, both of them lawyers, and so we created this legal firm for that. And what was originally elevator shaft in the underground, in the basement floor, has become a nice wine cellar. So this is the kind of thing when you work with old buildings. And this is the owner and his wife. Actually, he's a friend of mine from college days. So if you look behind, this is wonderful view of the palace. And that's actually where the name comes from. This terrace in the north, it faces the palace. So the name is North Terrace. And her last name is No. So it's also her terrace as well, North Terrace. And I had the pleasure of seeing this building made into a Lego block toy. The Lego patent has expired, so you can actually do this these days. And finally, for this exhibition in the Korean Cultural Center, this is the building that I submitted. It's called Castle of Skywalkers. It's a training facility for a private, professional volleyball team in Korea. Korea is a small country, but we have a very strong and very active professional volleyball league. And one of the teams have commissioned us to design their training centers. And this is the building. And the last picture is Mr. Christian Padar. Maybe Hungarians know who he is. He is a member of your national volleyball team. And he played for Skywalkers last season when they won the championship. So he is fondly remembered by many Koreans. So this probably is the only direct link between our exhibition and Hungary. Thank you for listening.